call it super boring, but we've got the boring side of privacy with Kieran Mesquita, who is a non-shilling moon math, talking about weird crypto stuff. So please welcome him to the stage. So we got your clicker here.
Perfect. Sweet. Hello. There we go. OK, so the boring side of privacy. Well, I think we've heard plenty of cool, interesting crypto projects building things, and probably going to hear a lot more later in this conference. But the aim of my talk here is hopefully people in this room maybe can leave it having improved their personal privacy just a little bit. So we'll go over a few things that you can do right now if you want to get your laptop out, or do this later. That you can do right now to make your personal privacy just a little bit better. Cool. I'm going to start talking about tools that I use. Probably the #1 way that we interact with Web 2 stuff, and probably Web 3 stuff as well, but #1 way that we interact with the wider internet is through a web browser, right? I think most people probably use Chrome. Maybe this demographic might be a bit different, but it's not great privacy-wise, right? So there's a couple of options that you could use. You've got Brave, LibreWolf, Firefox with a custom user.js. I think the most important thing here specifically is because it's sort of the primary way that you interact with a lot of things. You want something that just kind of works, doesn't really get in the way too much. So personally, I think I've switched to Brave. It tends to be fairly sane defaults, but some other options. You've got LibreWolf, which is a little bit more aggressive on the privacy side of things. It's a custom build of Firefox. And so it tends to be a bit harder to just have a working experience sometimes. But that's also an option. And you've got Firefox with a custom user.js. So that's a bit more involved, takes a little bit more time to set up. But you can kind of have a bit more of a tailored experience if you go down that route. They're all kind of Googleable if you want to go and do that. Cool. I think this one's fairly self-explanatory. So if you're using Google, please pick an alternative. They're all pretty good. The differences between them. So you've got things like Brave and DuckDuckGo, which have their own crawler, and then you've got other alternatives. So Startpage, which uses another search engine's crawler. The benefit of using something like Startpage is that you're not leaking your individual queries. They're still sort of aggregate, Bing in this. Sorry, no, Google in this case is still able to get sort of an aggregate idea of what people are searching, but you're not individually identifiable. The downside of that is maybe if you don't particularly like censorship, or maybe the way that Google specifically does censorship, this might not be a good option for you. But Google's probably got the best web crawlers out there, so choose your trade-off. And if you want to go a little bit harder on being private with your search engine, there's Cirx, which you can run your own, and it kind of just lets you query things locally. It has its own indexer, and there's multiple community-run circs nodes out there as well that you could use. Email. So there's a bit of a caveat here. If you're using Gmail, maybe here's some alternatives. So there's Proton Mail. I think personally, I found that to be the nicest UX. It's great if everyone that you're communicating with uses PGP, because it does natively use PGP. And all of these kind of have a built-in calendar as well, so you can migrate your Google Calendar across. But if you don't want to use Proton Mail, Tutanota is a good alternative. The downside of the top two there is because they use zero-knowledge encryption, if you forget your password or something and you don't have your recovery key, then you will lose access to your email. So if that's something that you don't want to happen, there is the option of Start Mail. Start Mail, the way they handle making it as difficult as possible for people to gain access to your account or compel decryption is there's a couple of different, the founders sort of live in a few different places in different jurisdictions, and they're all required to participate in order to decrypt and get you access to your account again. And if you just want to use your existing email, Thunderbird with OpenPGP probably works fine, but I think switching to one of the other email providers up there is a better option. There is a caveat with email. If you're discussing things that are really sensitive, it's not really the best medium to be using. Maybe you want to use a private messenger, but we still kind of require email for a lot of things, signing up for accounts and all. So here's some options. All right, 2FA. This one's fairly self-explanatory. I think the number one 2FA app that I've seen recommended is Google Authenticator. Just great, you should be using 2FA, but if you want to be a little bit more private, switching to either 2FAs or Ente, both are cross-platform, both seem to work pretty well for me. We'll kind of decouple you a little bit from Google. I know Google Authenticator introduced a sort of sneaky, off-device backup, which is kind of not ideal for 2FAs. So switching here is both good for privacy and maybe security. Next one. Okay, so we talked about email and email not being ideal for actually discussing sensitive matters. So maybe you might want to do it over a good messenger, right? Some options. Yes?
So what do you mean by ephemeral conversation for private tasks and speed?
Okay, I'll get to that in a second. So you've got Signal, which is kind of your gold standard for encryption. It's generally regarded as pretty good. You've got the alternative for Status as well, which is a peer-to-peer, uses your ETH address. And there's Logos people in the room somewhere as well. You can go and ask them questions about how it works. But those are two options for reasonably good user experience, but also still reasonably good privacy in your messaging application. If you're doing something that's really, really sensitive and you can't, for whatever reason, meet up in person to discuss it, obviously the ideal is meet up in person, leave anything with a microphone at the door, and talk privately. But if that's not possible, you've got things like Briar, Tox, and Speak. All three of them run over Tor. And the idea behind them is essentially you're able to spin up a identity, so it's just a public key. You can share it over another you share your public keys over another medium, so maybe you message them to each other over Signal, for example. And it just sets up a little like Tor rendezvous chat, right? Or Tor rendezvous connection, and then you can chat over that. And then when you're done, because none of the data ever leaves like your device or the Tor tunnel, you just delete the app, and like the record of that communication is well, hopefully erased. And the last one up here, because we do end up working in teams. Like all things aren't just direct person to person. Talking in like a work context over Signal is not the easiest to manage, and so Rocket Chat is an alternative to like you're sort of like a Slack that is private, although I wouldn't consider it to be as private as some of the others. Video calls. So Zoom a while back, did a little update to their terms of service saying that, yeah, we can use your call. We can use your calls to and train AI, which I don't know what people's stances are on AI, but it's not good for privacy. So there's two options up here. If you're willing to self-host, there's Jitsi Meet, run it on your own infra and everything. But if you just want something like you can just go and use, you've got Brave Talk, which is basically Jitsi Meet, just someone else runs it. So depending on how much effort you want to put into it, either of those two work fine. Note-taking. So, okay. Note-taking. So there's two options. They're both end-to-end encrypted, standard notes and NotesNock. So these are your alternatives to things like Google Keep. If you're on in the Apple ecosystem, to be honest, iCloud Notes probably works pretty well. If you go into your settings and turn on, I forget what Apple calls it, like paranoid or heightened security mode or something, it does end up actually being end-to-end encrypted. But those are two options that are both cross-platform and keep your notes nice and safe. Maps. This was the hardest for me to move away from Google or big tech services. Google Maps is a very, very good service, but yeah, here's some options. So OpenStreetMaps on the web, and the other two are just really front-end applications that use OpenStreetMaps in the background. I think the cool thing about both of them is you can actually just straight up download the maps and trails and stuff that you want offline. And now, if you're somewhere, traveling, and you don't have internet, or you've got unreliable internet, well, you've got reliable maps at least, which is useful. Let's see, DNS. Okay. So leaving the standard just alternatives to applications behind. That QR code goes to a couple of tutorials that I've written on how to set up private DNS on each platform. So there's Android, iOS, macOS, Windows. Personally, I think I found Quad 9 to be Quad 9 is the one that I use. I haven't really found anything else that I'm quite happy with. If you don't want to go, so that QR code, the tutorial walks through setting it up at an OS level. If you don't want to do that and want something a little bit easier, there's some applications up there that are options. So Unbound on your laptop, desktop, whatever, Nebulo and DNS Cloak on your phones. So DNS is probably the one thing that people kind of think about the least when they're trying to set up their devices to be a little bit be more private. All traffic on the internet is basically TLS by default now, which is good, but you still end up leaking a lot of metadata on what sites you're visiting, just purely by your DNS queries. If you're using your computer at home, the DNS server that you're using is probably either like Google DNS or your ISPs. So with that, underneath Quad 9, there's a few terms over there, so like DNS over TLS and DNS over HTTPS, which are both standards for encrypting your DNS traffic. So anyone watching your network can't actually see what DNS queries you're making. OK, VPNs. Got a bit of an asterisk on this one. I have to address that anyway. So I think for like the reason that most people use a VPN is, OK, I'm on like public Wi-Fi, and I don't want someone else on that LAN network to snoop on my traffic. That's not as big of a deal nowadays with TLS being everywhere, but still, I guess better safe than sorry. I think for that specific use case, actually just running a WireGuard setup. So WireGuard will just let you self-host a VPN on pretty much any like connection computer that you want. So like the best thing if you're like worried about public Wi-Fi, in my opinion, is like run WireGuard on your computer at home, and then whenever you're at a coffee shop working, you can just like connect to your home internet and like route all of your traffic through that. If you want to use like a VPN service, there's Proton and Mullvad, which tend to have pretty good encryption, and I mean, as far as I can tell, are run pretty well. Maybe be careful about like just installing any random VPN. So yeah, I know like Facebook recently got caught using a VPN app that they partnered or owned, but basically using the VPN app to access network traffic on users' devices, which is not great. So using like a sketchy VPN provider, you're actually just trading your ISP's ability to log your traffic for the VPN provider. Like your VPN provider ends up being your ISP, right? So please don't choose a sketchy VPN provider. DVPNs, like I know we're in crypto, there's quite a few projects. I have questions. Come show your DVPN project to me afterwards. Like I'd actually be interested in learning about it if anyone here is working on that. All right, cloud storage. So for things that you just want to synchronize between devices, you've got SyncThing, which is an open source, just like a folder synchronization program. You can install it on like your phone, your laptop, or two laptops, or whatever your setup is. And it'll just keep those folders in sync. If that's all you want, then that's probably what you want to use. I know there's some other like, so there's things like Google Photos and all, which specifically for photo storage provide a lot of cool features that you can't just get from like a simple file sync program. Things like being able to like browse through your photos by date, or going through and like seeing the actual previews without like downloading all of the photos, for example. So you've got something like Entei as a option for that. So that is an encrypted photo storage service. If you absolutely have to use a cloud storage service, so whatever that may be, like Google Drive or something, maybe you want to like make sure that you've got a copy of whatever you're syncing on something that you don't directly own. So it's like, oh, if I lose all my devices, I still have like a copy of that data somewhere. You can use a program called Cryptomator, which will actually encrypt all of your data locally, and then just like place that in the sync folder that your cloud service uses, and now you sort of just bring your own encryption to whatever cloud service you're using. The just use it like options, you've got Mega, Proton Drive, File, and which just like you just install the app, and it's roughly equivalent to just downloading like OneDrive or Google Drive. But I'd still prefer to use it with Cryptomator. And if you want to self-host, the option there is Nextcloud. File sharing. So let's say you've got, you're like talking to someone over Signal or whatever, and like you want to send them a file that's like above the file size limit for whatever application you're using, right? You've got a couple of options here to send that securely. You can send it using just zip it, and then like use 7-zip or Keka. Set a password on it. You can share that password through your secure messaging application. Just make sure that when you zip the file, you encrypt it with specifically AES-256 encryption, and you can send it, or 7-zip as well. And if you don't want to like deal with zip files and all, you can use something called Onion Share, which similarly to the like ephemeral chat applications that I was talking about earlier, just you establish a connection over Tor and then send the file and then get rid of the connection afterwards. But those are your two options. Language tools. I assume a fair number of people in here are a little bit nomadic, like me, travel to places where maybe you don't speak the language there. Google Translate is like reasonably effective, right? But again, like we care about privacy. So what I tend to use is Lingua Translate. It's just a front end to Google Translate that again, it's sort of like Google can see all of the queries in bulk, but it makes it more difficult to like individually attribute a particular like translate query to you specifically. And because I'm absolutely terrible at writing, I've used a language tool as sort of an alternative to Grammarly. It's a nice private like grammar spell checker. Helps me write better sometimes. I don't know how effective it is, but yeah. All right. So another thing that people maybe don't think about much is on phones, a potential way to leak your privacy or reduce your privacy is actually through the keyboard that you use. On iOS, the system keyboard is actually reasonably good. But on Android, the default, if you've got a Samsung thing, is probably Flex Key or something to that effect. If you're on more or less any other Android manufacturer, you're probably using Gboard, so Google's keyboard. You can switch that keyboard out for one of the options here, so Florist Board or Open Board. Open Board gives you a very similar feel to Google Keyboard if you just want to like simple switch out. And I find Florist Board to be a little bit like nicer UI-wise, but those are both options to make sure that you're not like leaking any of your like private secrets through things like autocorrect and data that gets sent off for things like that. And since we have probably a reasonable number of devs here, this is a hackathon. The last little thing I have here is if you're using VS Code, which I think a lot of people here would be doing, an option just to switch out is VS Codium. So VS Code is actually like if you download the build from Microsoft, isn't actually the open source, just directly the open source code that gets published. It's Microsoft produces builds of VS Code with extra telemetry baked into it, right? So VS Codium is just a build purely of the open source code of VS Code, so you don't end up with any of the extra bundled telemetry. And if you're like a crypto dev, maybe you're like a little bit more protective of the sort of I don't know, like environment secrets or things like that might exist in your dev environment. Something to keep in mind is it does like very rarely break some of the like extensions that like depend on some of the Microsoft services that get bundled with VS Code, but that's very rare. And domain registration, you've got Njala, which is a nice little way to like anonymously register domains. I've got a short slide. If you want to go and pump my social numbers, there's that. But otherwise, hopefully you end up doing some of the things that I talked about and a little bit more private in your personal life.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have a couple questions from the audience real quick for us to talk about. First, thoughts on Obsidian for note-taking? Yeah, the mic would be helpful.
I'll grab that again. Obsidian, I have used Obsidian. I do like the markdown formatting. It just kind of annoyed me with some of the limitations on sync, and so I switched to some of the other one of the others. Yep.
All right. How do iCloud Notes and Google Keep compare in terms of privacy?
I think so. Google Keep is, as far as note-taking applications go, it's probably like the worst you can do in terms of privacy. iCloud Notes is actually a little bit better. It does have encryption, and if you're in the Apple ecosystem and are using these services, what you can do is there is a specific setting that you can go and turn on in iCloud, which makes everything purely end-to-end encryption, end-to-end encrypted. The downside of that is if you lose access to your devices, Apple can't reset things for you, right? So you lose the ability to password reset and gain access to your data again. But if you value privacy, maybe that's a trade-off you're willing to make.
All right, cool, thank you. And I have a question for you. Are you ready for your next panel?
Yes.
Awesome, cool. Thank you so much for your presentation and teaching us all how to be more private.
Thank you.